The Plainsfield UFO sightings, as they are referred to by enthusiasts of Fortean phenomena, occurred during the summer of 1998 and, perhaps unsurprisingly, took place in the farming community of Plainsfield, California. Plainsfield was, and still is, a very small settlement, with perhaps a couple hundred residents at most, and an hour-and-a-half drive to the nearest large town. This perhaps accounts for the unusual degree of obscurity that the sightings have enjoyed over the decades. Though some of the more paranoid students of UFO folklore insist that information surrounding the incidents was purposefully suppressed by the federal government. The subsequent documents represent countless hours of research into the unusual happenings of that summer, and should conceivably display a clear timeline of events. Newspaper clipping from the Thompsontown Tribune, July 8th, 1998. Earthquake leaves huge sinkhole in Plainsfield. This past week, the sleepy town of Plainsfield received quite a rude awakening courtesy of a series of hitherto unprecedented earthquakes. At approximately 4:30 p.m. on Sunday, July 5th, Plainsfield residents experienced a series of intense tremors lasting about 15 minutes. There was minor damage to some buildings and a handful of temporary power outages. But more striking was the surprise found by local farmer Theodore Albertson. "It was like nothing I've ever felt in all my years of living here," says Albertson, 57. "It was real odd. The ground kind of pulsed all rhythmically. You ever see one of those kids with a subwoofer and they've got the volume cranked all the way up so you feel the bass in your bones? It was like that, but everywhere, and without the sound. Just the feeling of shaking, pulsating like a heartbeat." Anyway, after all the rumbling was finished, I went out to the field to check to make sure none of the fences collapsed, only to find this massive hole. Must be over 100 feet across at least. I can't really get a good look at the bottom. It's like it's at an angle or something, so the shadows cover it up. But it looks more deep. Theodore has expressed some interest in turning the hole into a tourist attraction, but some Plainfield residents have expressed doubts as to its profitability. "I don't see what's so interesting about a great big hole in the ground," says Rebecca Carlton, 65. "Besides, just being near it makes me feel sick. And if I look down there for too long, it sets off my tinnitus, something awful. Lord knows why. If you ask me, he ought to get it filled up with cement." Statement of Jessica May, mailed to the California Unidentified Flying Object Society, July 10th, 1998. To whom it may concern, I was out stargazing in my backyard last night, and I experienced something most unusual. There's not too much light pollution around here, thanks to it being so remote, so you can really get a good look at the Milky Way. I was peering through my telescope when I noticed something odd. There was a star that shouldn't be there, just under the Big Dipper. Now, of course, I double-checked my star charts. These things don't just appear out of nowhere. But try as I might, I couldn't find anything that corresponds to it. I was starting to get a bit excited. I mean, who gets a chance to find a whole new star? But before I could go put in a call to the nearest university, the damn thing moved. Now, I don't want you thinking I'm just some nitwit farm girl who's never seen a plane before. I mean, this star was sitting completely still one moment, and then the next, it was rushing around like some sort of whirligig. Couldn't have been a helicopter either. There wasn't any sound or whirring or anything like that. Anyway, I watched it bounce around the sky for a bit, hardly knowing what to think. Until, eventually, it started coming towards me. Now, I'd assume this thing was real high up, since I couldn't hear anything at all. But it must have been only a couple thousand feet at the highest. As it got closer, I saw more of a definite form to it, and I swear on my life, it was saucer-shaped. Now, I didn't really get a good look at the thing. I was so panicked I bolted back inside, leaving my telescope behind in my rush. There was a bright light, like a searchlight, and then it passed over the house. I remember it was headed over in the direction of the Albertson place. When I finally calmed myself down and went back outside to get my telescope, the thing was gone. I felt nauseated, and I remember dry heaving a bit, but I can't tell if that wasn't just from the stress of the whole ordeal. In any event, I figured you ufology folks would be interested. Newspaper clipping from the Thompson County Tribune, July 15th, 1998. Flying saucer sighted in Plainsfield. Still recovering from the unusual earthquake that occurred earlier this month, the little town of Plainsfield is once again flung into the spotlight with yet another strange event. Multiple residents have reported seeing a strange light in the sky night after night, which some have claimed is none other than a spacecraft of extraterrestrial origin. People don't like the phrase flying saucer, says Jessica May, 23. But if you ask me, there isn't a more apt description. It's not a case of mistake identity with a weather balloon or something like that. Theodore Albertson, 57, says, "Darn thing keeps appearing in the sky every night. It wouldn't be so bad really, but then, after it's all done with its zipping and zooming, it comes down in my field. Not landing in the field, mind you, but it goes down that sinkhole left over from the earthquake. Call me crazy, I don't mind, but I bet there's some sort of secret base down there or something. I'd go down there and check, but the angle of the pit is much too steep at my age." Skeptics have claimed that the event is a hoax, or perhaps even a publicity stunt. Rebecca Carlton, 65, a neighbor of Albertson, says, "I bet Teddy just got one of them remote-controlled toy helicopters and tied a flashlight to it or something. Easier to drum up visitors for his weird pit if he makes people think there's a spaceship down there." A letter written by Alejandra Valdez to her sister, Felicia Valdez, July 23rd, 1998. Dear Felicia, I'm writing you today because of some very unusual news. Do you recall that old plot of land with the barn on it that I've been trying to sell for the past couple years? Well, I've finally secured a buyer. Paid in cash too. The whole thing took a week or so to get squared away. Now, that in of itself is a bit strange, but the weird part about all this is who bought it. The gentleman who tore the property said his name was Jupiter 7, and that he represented the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood. Quite a strange fellow he was, dressed up in a shiny silver suit, like something out of one of those science fiction movies I know your husband loves so much, and his head was shaven down bald as an egg. He had a funny little goatee too at the very end of his chin. Now of course, I got to asking him about his silly name and what on earth the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood could be. And bless his heart, he was just as polite as could be. But goodness gracious was the answer he gave strange. He started talking all this nonsense about how aliens from outer space have been visiting Earth for millions of years, and that all of our religions are just misinterpretations of their visitations. He said that he himself was a reincarnation of one of those aliens, and that's why he changed his name. Now you know me, Felicia. I'm not one to go judging folks for their faith or lack thereof. But I'll be honest with you, it took a lot of effort to keep from laughing. I managed to keep my sense of decorum, for politeness sake. But wow. Anyway, I asked him what he and his so-called church, more of a cult if you ask me, wanted with my barn, and he said that our little town of Plainsfield was in the middle of a visitation from beings from another world. Now I bet you've already heard about how recently some of my more impressionable neighbors have claimed to see some strange lights up in the sky recently, but I never would have guessed that it would lead to our very own UFO cult. Anyway, the amount this Jupiter character was offering was so generous that I just had to accept, regardless of his attire and beliefs. I signed away the deed later that week, and that was that. Since then, I've seen a few of those CIB fellows gathered at the barn with a bunch of RVs, camper vans, and tents set up over there. The folks there seem polite enough, hippie types mostly. They don't really say much when I see them at the general store or out around town. There's only 2 dozen of them or so, Mr. 7 included. Anyway, you ought to stop by sometime. With the money I got from the sale, I've been able to fix up the house a little bit and get a few nice things. I even bought a brand new television and switched over from cable to satellite. There are so many new channels I don't even know how to keep up. I keep getting interference, something awful though, but only at night. Must be some quirk with the damn thing. With love, Alejandra. Complaint letter sent by Alejandra Valdez to a certain television provider. Company name withheld. July 24th, 1998. To whom it may concern. I recently switched over to as my television provider, and at first I was thrilled at the wide selection of channels and high picture quality, but I've been having a lot of difficulties at night specifically. Oftentimes, I'll be sitting there watching one channel, when suddenly it will change to a different one without me doing a thing. Sometimes the whole screen will just become a mess of static with this positively awful shrieking sound. It's gotten to the point that I just have given up watching TV at night. At first I thought maybe it's just that I live in a somewhat remote area, but that doesn't make sense. Why would it only stop working at night? I don't pretend to know much about how television works, but that just doesn't sit right with me. Besides, I see the satellite in the sky at night sometimes, much too bright to be a star. The worst part is that sometimes the static isn't entirely static. There are these blurry half images of what I can only assume are distorted faces, and these weird, garbled words in some foreign language. I must be partially picking up some other broadcast. One more thing. Sometimes the TV set will turn on by itself in the middle of the night. And when it does, I always get that weird half-broadcast with the faces and the babbling. Please send someone around to fix the issue as soon as possible. Otherwise, I want a full refund. Sincerely, Alejandra Valdez. Diary entry of Brandon Adams, July 25th, 1998. I don't even know where to start with this. I have to write it down though. I have to get it out of my head, otherwise I feel like I'm going to go insane. I hope I'm just crazy. I really just want to be crazy. I was out watching the moving star last night. The one that's got the whole town worked up, and that weirdo church is focused on. It was very strange to watch, to see it just zip around overhead, then stay still, then move somewhere else. It moved like a hummingbird or a bee, but it was completely silent. This went on for a few hours, I guess. Just me sitting in a lawn chair watching the sky. That distant orb of light zooming about overhead. I don't know why I didn't get bored of it. Lord knows it wasn't that interesting. But there was this constant sense that I was seeing something truly out of this world. Something beyond the normal scope of things. My property borders on Pete Richards' place, the cattle rancher. There's no animals dangerous enough around here to threaten a cow, so he just leaves them outside at night. Most of them were just asleep in the field, but a couple were grazing, insomniacs getting a midnight snack, I suppose. Some of them joined me in looking up at the star that moved. I started noticing that the star was getting bigger, brighter. It took me quite a long time for me to realize it was coming down, falling from the sky like Lucifer expelled from heaven. There was no sound, no hum of extraterrestrial engines. It just got brighter and brighter, till I could see the vague outline, flat and circular. A saucer. Just writing it out makes me feel like a lunatic. Everyone knows there's no such thing as a flying saucer. Everyone knows it's just made-up stories repeated by idiots who want so desperately to feel less alone in the universe. But that night, the universe seemed to have other ideas about what is and isn't real. As soon as I could see the thing for what it was, I hightailed it to my porch and hid underneath it, scraping my knees a bit. I'm still not sure why I did that instead of just going inside and locking the door. I guess I was worried it would see me through my windows. From underneath the porch, I didn't get too good of a view of the sky above, nor that baleful false star. But I could see Pete's field just fine. I wish I just went inside and hid under the covers until it went away. A bright light, like the warning gleam of a lighthouse, shone down upon a cow in the field. One of the insomniacs. The animal froze instantly, as if it were spontaneously turned to stone. Slowly, it began to be lifted by some unseen force off the ground. It didn't struggle. It didn't cry out, but I could see its sides begin to heave in and out quickly, hyperventilating from stress, its eyes widening. Then came the cutting. Thin slices like a surgeon's scalpel, peeling through layers of hide and into the flesh beneath. A flap of skin pulled softly by invisible fingers, perfectly precise, as deliberate as calligraphy. And the blood. Oh God, the blood. It flowed up and out from the geometrical wound towards the light above, shimmering like rubies. I would have vomited if I could have worked up the strength to move. Organs began to be extracted from the wound, fleshy objects which I could not identify. I'll admit, I am a stranger to the butcher's charnel art. All the while, the cow's eyes spun maddeningly, its breathing sharp and swift. But there were no cries, no screams. The other cattle kept their distance but didn't panic. They seemed more confused than frightened. The total alienness of the present danger not clear to their animal brains. Eventually, the levitating cow's breathing and eye movement ceased, and I knew it was finally quite dead. I watched as a handful of organs and an enormous cloud of crimson ichor were sucked up above my sight. Until finally, as abruptly as the light appeared, it vanished. The exsanguinated corpse of the cow collapsed to the ground in a heap of pallid flesh. I skidded out from under the porch and got back inside my house. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I didn't try to. Instead, I just sat on the floor in silence until morning. I'm going to make some arrangements to stay with friends. I don't want to be in Plainsfield right now. Transcript of a statement given by Robert A. Bear. Recorded by the Thompson County Sheriff's Department. July 30th, 1998. A. Bear.
I've already told you all this. What do you mean I have to go through it again?
Deputy.
Just one more time if you please, Mr. A. Bear. Just so we can get it all on tape.
H.
Fine. But after this, I want to go home.
D.
Of course. Please, give your statement. I was driving back home from the city. I'd been spending a few hours on the road, so it was pretty dark. Something like 10:30 maybe. We got your call at 10:23. Please continue. Anyway, I'm getting a little tired, since I've been driving for so long. Nearly dozing off, if I'm being completely honest here. Must have closed my eyes for a second, because all of a sudden, there was this pile in the center of the road. God, I don't want to think about it. Please continue. We just need it on tape, and then you can go home. Alright. Just give me a second. Take your time. I didn't really know what I was looking at first. I was pretty out of it, you know. But I get out of the car to try and get a better idea of what I was seeing. And it was a mound of bodies. About a dozen of them. Human ones. All broken and bent, like a pile of puppets with their strings cut. Did you recognize any of them? Not by name. But they were all those cult folks. The Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood, or whatever it's called. It took me a while before I realized one of them was still breathing. A girl, maybe 17, 18, on top of the rest. She looked like every bone in her body was broken, but she was still alive. Anyway, you know the rest. I called you guys. She was taken over to the hospital, and now we're here. Can I go home now? Give me a moment to talk with the sheriff, but after that, you're free to go. Thank you for your time, Mr. Abear.
Newspaper clipping from the Thompson County Tribune, July 31st, 1998. UFO cult mass leaves 13 dead, 1 injured. Last night, the Thompson County Sheriff's Department identified the bodies of 13 members of the religious movement known as the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood, an organization that some have characterized as a cult. Authorities have not revealed the cause of death, but are tentatively labeling the event a mass. The bodies were discovered on a stretch of highway just outside of Plainsfield, apparently in the middle of the road. There is reportedly one survivor of the event, who authorities have identified as Alice Brown, though according to Plainsfield residents, Brown currently goes by the name Venus 5. Brown has not yet awakened since being recovered on top of the 13 dead bodies on the highway, and hospital staff describe her as being in critical condition. The remaining 12 members of the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood have not been located. The Sheriff's Department investigation into the church's compound have turned up no significant leads. According to reports, the site was entirely empty, with a number of vehicles and tents left behind. The building used by the church as a place of worship, a repurposed barn, is reportedly in extreme disrepair. "It's damn eerie," says Deputy John Higgins. So far we have no leads as to where they ran off to. The barn they were using as some sort of temple has no clues either. It doesn't make a lick of sense. The roof looks like it was torn off or something. We found some bits of smashed wood on the ground nearby. It looks almost like a bomb went off, but there isn't any signs of an explosion. We found some sort of broadcasting equipment in there, but nothing that could explain what on earth blew the damn roof off. The damnest thing though are the scratches all the way up to the side of the wall, like someone was being dragged up and clinging on for dear life. It gives me the willies just thinking about it. Journal entry from Melinda Flanagan, researcher for the Californian Unidentified Flying Object Society. August 1st, 1998. I arrived in Plainsfield a little past noon. It is a ludicrously tiny town, little more than a main street and a few acres of farmland. It's one of those places that might be completely left off a map and nobody would even notice. I had a conversation with Miss May about her UFO sightings in a rundown old diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the mid-50s. The discussion was neither particularly illuminating nor particularly interesting. She didn't tell me anything she hadn't already said in the letter she has previously sent. And when I asked her if she's seen the object since her initial sighting, she reported that she hadn't, and had in fact been avoiding stargazing since the incident. She claimed that others had seen the UFO as well, but didn't feel comfortable sharing their names with me. Apparently, she was worried that the others might think she was off a rocker if they found out she was talking with people like herself. No offense. I thanked her for her time and was about to chalk up this whole trip as a huge waste of time before I noticed the headline of an article peering up at me from the newspaper stand next to the door. UFO cult leaves 13 dead, 1 injured. I paid for the newspaper and read it quickly in my car. The article didn't specify which hospital the survivor, Alice Brown, aka Venus 5, according to the article, was being kept at. But a quick peek at my map showed only one nearby, Shaver Memorial Hospital. I gave the hospital a call on the single payphone in the entirety of Plainsfield and put on my best impression of a worried relative. I claimed that Miss Brown was a cousin of mine and that I wanted to see her if possible. Fortunately for me, It appeared that she had since woken up from her unconscious state, though they warned me that she seemed far from lucid. I thanked the hospital staff for their time and started on the long drive to the hospital. When I arrived, I once again presented myself as Miss Brown's cousin and was swiftly escorted to the room in which she was being kept. The nurse who guided me there then left to give us some privacy. She didn't look good. 2 broken legs, cracked ribs, a shattered pelvis, and a fractured arm, IV drips and all manners of wires covering her in a tangled mess like cobwebs. I have no idea how the cops thought something like this could be the result of an attempted maybe a jump from a high building, but she was found on the highway in the middle of the flattest landscape I've ever had the displeasure of driving across. "Who are you?" she asked, justifiably confused. "Are you with the police?" I did some quick thinking, trying my best to guess how well she would cooperate with the police. Given how little I knew about her membership in a cult, I figured it maybe wouldn't be the best move. I decided to give her the truth. "No, Venus," I said, purposefully using her chosen name from the church. "I'm with an organization called CUFOs. I wanted to ask if you remember anything about the night they found you on the highway." "Don't call me that name," she muttered before coughing slightly. "It was all a bunch of crap. They aren't angels or gods or whatever the hell Harold wanted them to be." "Harold?" "The real name of that idiot who called himself Jupiter 7. The guy who ran the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood. He's probably dead now though." "What happened?" She looked at me for a moment, sizing me up. "You wouldn't believe me," she finally said after a few moments. "Try me. I can guarantee I've heard stranger things." I quietly turned on the tape recorder in my purse, which she didn't seem to notice. With a sigh, she began to tell her story, which I have transcribed below in full. Statement of Alice Brown, abductee. I joined the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood because I was lost. I just got out of a bad relationship and didn't really have anywhere to go. I suppose I was going a little crazy, I guess. This guy, Harold, though he preferred to be called Jupiter 7, promised a life of happiness and peace, and helped with giving me a place to stay and food to eat. I guess Harold was independently wealthy or something, some trust fund kid. He had the money to rent or buy property in places where weird stuff happened. UFOs, Bigfoot sightings, alleged miracles, you name it. He proclaimed that those places were where visitors from the stars have made their mark on the world. Nothing really ever came of it. We'd stay there for a couple of weeks or months, make ourselves pretend we saw something of note, and move on. I believed all this nonsense at the time, of course. We all wanted to believe in something, whether it be God, aliens, whatever. It gives us hope. Anyway, Plainsfield was different. Like clockwork, every night we'd see that moving star in the sky. Too quick and agile to be a plane or helicopter. Dead silent too. And every night it would zip down over at the Albertson property and disappear, like it was landing there or something. Harold made a bunch of offers to buy out Teddy Albertson's land, but it never went anywhere. Eventually, he threatened to get a restraining order, and Harold stopped bothering him after that. Harold got this idea in his head that he should try and make contact with the star. He bought a bunch of radio equipment and set it up in the barn we used as a church. He spent all night fiddling with the frequency, trying to find the right one to communicate with the visitors, while we watched the distant ball of light zooming around in silence. One night, he called us into the barn and told us that he had made contact. We were all excited, of course, and believed him. You've got to understand, he convinced all of us we had some sort of alien soul inside of us, that those things that piloted the UFOs were our kin in some way. To us, this was a big deal, like coming home to your family after years of being away. Harold started turning on the radio equipment and began to speak into a microphone, giving some speech about universal friendship. We waited in the pews patiently while he gave his sermon. Then, we felt a rumbling. The ground felt like it was heaving beneath us, and a bright white light started to shine through the gaps in the wooden roof. There was tinnitus in my ears, and my hair started to stand on end, like someone was rubbing a balloon against it. Then, the roof just got clear ripped off, and we saw it. A flying saucer, just like they show in the movies. Gleaming chrome, bright lights, the whole ordeal. We started to float up into the air, and I don't know exactly what I was expecting to feel. But it wasn't pain. It hurt as we started getting pulled up into the air. It felt like someone had stuck a meat hook in our guts and started tugging. I even saw someone trying to claw his way back to the ground, though he only succeeded in leaving scratches from his fingernails against the barn wall. There was no escaping it. It was stronger than us. Before I knew it, we were inside. It was as dark on the inside as it was bright on the outside. We were in a circular room with metallic walls and no visible doors or windows. Harold tried to calm us down, telling us that we were going to be taken to some sort of utopia and that we should all be grateful. After a few minutes, we all stopped hyperventilating from fear and managed to calm down a bit. It was then that a panel of the wall receded and slid to the side, like some sort of door. But I could have sworn there were no seams when I last looked. Out of that door came a being. Based on what Harold had told us about the beings which visited this planet, I was expecting a tall, beautiful creature shining with radiant light. This was quite the opposite. The room was far too dark to get a good look at it, but it seemed stunted, shriveled even. It stood at about the height of a child and was wearing some sort of grayish uniform. Its bald, nearly featureless head seemed too large for its body. The main thing that I noticed were its eyes. Dark, soulless, and unblinking. It waved a thin, stick-like arm in a signal to something behind it. And that same agonizing tugging sensation from before forced us against the wall. We were held in place, completely immobilized, and unable even to speak. It walked up to each of us, pulling some sort of device off of its hip, and pointed it at our heads one by one. When it reached me, I felt an intense burning pain in my skull, like someone was branding my brain. I wanted to cry out, to scream, but I couldn't. It eventually passed me over and moved on to the rest. When it was finally finished, it jabbered something in some language I didn't recognize and pointed to 12 of us, including Harold. The ones who it pointed at seemed to be released from their paralysis, slumping to their knees. The thing pointed to the doorway where it came from and barked an order of some sort. The ones who were set free from their paralysis began filing out through the doorway in mostly silence, though I think I heard one or two of them swallowing back tears. Finally, that short thing in the uniform exited the room through the same doorway, and the wall sealed up behind it. The remaining 14 of us were released from our paralysis, and a few of us began to sob. We didn't know what was going on. Then the floor began to open up. It was like a camera aperture, but slower. We heard metal scrape on metal as we saw the hole in the center of the room expand, revealing the landscape far below. We all clung to the rapidly diminishing edge, screaming to be saved. Until finally, there was nothing left to cling to. I remember falling, watching the saucer speed away in the distance, rapidly descending towards the Elberson farm. I recall wondering to myself as I fell, time seeming to slow to a crawl. If they're supposed to be from outer space, why do they keep on flying down to that sinkhole? That's all I remember before I woke up here. Journal entry from Melinda Flanagan, researcher for the Californian Unidentified Flying Object Society. August 2nd, 1998. After my exciting conversation with Miss Brown yesterday, I had to retire to a nearby hotel. The nurses insisted she needed her rest. If what she told me was true, she certainly did. The next day, however, I came across an unusual sight as I pulled into the hospital parking lot. Miss Brown was in a stretcher, evidently either sedated or comatose, and being carried into the back of an unmarked black van by two men in suits. I got out of the car quickly and approached the men, asking what they were doing with my cousin. The taller of the two men, bald with a well-kept goatee, turned mechanically towards me and smiled blandly, though I could tell there was no mirth behind the black sunglasses that obscured his eyes. "She is very sick, sir, or ma'am. We are taking her to a special facility. She will receive excellent care. Do not be afraid." Those were his exact words. He spoke them with all the warmth and sincerity of a meat grinder. I was dumbfounded as he and his companion finished loading Miss Brown into the back of the van. I could have sworn there seemed to be something wrong with the top of the man's head. It looked like a very thin white line around the circumference, but it was far too faint to tell for sure. I tried to protest as they shut the door to the back of the van and clambered into the front seats, but they acted like I wasn't even there. They drove off, and I was left alone in the parking lot, with a pit at the bottom of my stomach. I'm heading back home tonight, and I hope to God I never have to come back here. Something about those men makes the hair on the back of my neck stand on end just thinking about them. I have a feeling that Alice Brown is gone for good. After the disappearance of Alice Brown, there have been no more UFO sightings in Plainsfield. The sinkhole in Theodore Albertson's field collapsed, seemingly of its own accord, on August 4th, 1998. The location of the missing 12 members of the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood remains unknown. Certain elements of the incident, such as the unusual earthquake, appearance of the entity encountered by Miss Brown, and the bizarre behavior of the men encountered by Miss Flanagan, corresponds closely with the Stevensville incident of 1987. But the significance of these similarities is unknown.